When the ramp of the landing craft dropped and the icy water hit our waists, I knew that sunrise could be my last. I was just 18 with a rosary in my pocket, and fear stuck in my throat. The horizon was an ocean that morning. It was steel, smoke, and screams. My name is Augustin Morales. I'm 96 years old now, living quietly in a little house by the coast of Galicia. The sea hits hard here, but somehow it gives me peace. Every morning I wake up early, make myself a cup of coffee with milk, and sit by the window to watch the sun rise. It's a ritual I've kept for decades, a reminder that I'm still alive. But not every sunrise is like this one. There's one I'll never forget, no matter how much memory fades with the years. It was a June morning, 1944, the one the world remembers as D-Day. That morning I wasn't by my window. I was on a boat that rocked like a nutshell in the middle of the ocean. Next to me were boys, barely 20, some even younger, clutching photos of their mothers, little Saint medals, and fear in their eyes. I had the same fear, though I tried hard not to show it. The sea smelled of salt, iron, gunpowder, and death. And as we moved closer to the coast of Normandy, I remember thinking, that sun we saw might be the last one we'd ever see. That's why today, every time I watch the sunrise, I give thanks. Because I live to tell the story. And because some stories deserve to be heard, even when they hurt. There are mornings that never fade. No matter how many years pass, no matter how the body ages or the memory begins to crack. And that morning in June 1944, I still carry it on my skin, like an invisible burn that never quite healed. The sea was alive, but not the same sea I'd known before. It didn't have the calm of fishing days, nor the gentle reflection of the sun. It was an ocean made of steel, a roaring beast built of ships, smoke, and hope. When you looked toward the horizon, you didn't see distance. You saw a forest of masts, of landing craft, of shadows moving in unison to the rhythm of engines. It felt as if all of humanity had decided to sail toward one single point, toward a destiny from which many would never return. I was there, standing in a small boat that shook with every wave, as if the sea itself was trying to throw us back. Cold water poured into our boots. The air smelled of salt, of iron, of fear. And something else, something you only recognize when you're about to lose everything. Beside me, the boys, some barely men, held on to crumpled letters, rusted medals, photographs worn soft by time. One whispered his mother's name. Another kissed a tiny cross. Someone forced a laugh, telling a clumsy joke just to stop his hands from trembling. The sky was beginning to pale, but the light brought no comfort. It was cold, distant, as if even the sun refused to witness what was coming. Bombs thundered in the distance. And each explosion made the air shudder, like the earth itself was breathing in pain. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the Germans could hear it from the shore. The noise was a storm, engines roaring, men shouting in a dozen accents, metal clashing, and the sharp whine of bullets cutting through the wind. And inside all that chaos, there was silence. That strange, heavy silence that comes when you finally understand there's no turning back. They called it D-Day. A simple name. Harmless, almost. But to us, it wasn't a letter nor a plan on a map. It was pure fear. Raw courage. It was thousands of hearts holding their breath at once. Thousands of prayers whispered between explosions. Thousands of eyes meeting for the last time without a word. I remember thinking something so small it almost made me laugh. The sun is rising, will I live to see it set? That was all the certainty we had. No glory, no victory, no patriot speeches. Just that morning, that fragile, burning morning, that might have been our last. And that's why I'm telling you this, my friend. Because what happened on those beaches wasn't just a battle. It was a moment suspended between fear and courage, between death and duty. A moment when the whole world held its breath, waiting to see if the human heart could keep beating. When my boots touched the sand and the cold water reached my knees, I realized history had stopped moving. And as the bullets screamed and men fell all around me, I could only think one thing: that if I fell too, at least it would be beneath that same sunrise I still see every time I close my eyes. Imagine this, my friend. Months of waiting. Months when time itself seemed frozen, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for a signal that never came. We knew something big was coming. You could feel it in the air, in the hushed voices of officers, in the trains that arrived before dawn loaded with ammunition, in the eyes of commanders who avoided meeting hours for too long. But no one knew when, or where. In the camps of southern England, thousands of us lived suspended between routine and uncertainty. Mud was our floor and the sky, our only roof. By day the air was filled with the constant growl of engines and the sharp echo of gunfire from training drills. By night, silence was so thick you could hear a match being struck, the crunch of boots on gravel, the slow exhale of a cigarette in the dark. Some killed time playing cards, as if the shuffle of a deck could distract them from the bigger gamble we were about to take. Others wrote letters that began with "Dear Mom" or "My love," not knowing if those words would ever reach the hands they were meant for. There were long moments when we just stared at the sky, wondering if we'd ever see another sunrise, if we'd ever feel the smell of rain at home again, if we'd ever hear someone call our name, not in command but with affection. The young ones tried to act brave, laughing too loud, making plans for after the war. The older ones, the veterans, spoke little. They knew silence was a kind of shield, a way of keeping the mind from wandering too far into what was coming. Meanwhile, in dimly lit rooms far away from the mud and the cold, the generals bent over endless maps. Every line drawn, every red arrow, every penciled note decided the fate of thousands. One wrong move could mean a massacre. One hesitation, the end of everything. And there, under the flicker of oil lamps, the destiny of the world was being written, in ink and trembling hands. The Allies were building something that bordered on impossible, a deception so grand even we could barely believe it. They tricked the Germans into thinking we'd strike somewhere else. They built fake camps with inflatable tanks and wooden planes. Entire ghost armies existed only in photographs. It was a chess game played across the planet, and we were the pieces about to move. And the sea. The sea was waiting, quietly filling with ships, one after another, as if the ocean itself knew how to keep a secret too big for words. From the cliffs, you could see their silhouettes, black shapes lining the horizon, motionless, like beasts asleep before the hunt. The wind carried the scent of fuel, of steel, and of shared fear. The tension was something you could touch. Days felt endless. Nights eternal. Every sound, a slamming door, a plane overhead, a distant shout, made your heart skip. Some men prayed softly, eyes fixed on the clouds, searching for an answer that never came. Others laughed too loudly, trying to convince themselves the world wasn't about to change. And a few just stared at their boots, counting breaths, knowing each one brought them closer to whatever waited across the channel. I remember that last night before the departure. The sky was heavy with clouds and a thin rain fell, quiet, steady, like the world itself was crying in advance. They ordered us to pack, check our weapons, tighten every strap. No one spoke. You could only hear the buckles closing, the boots sinking into the mud, the metallic click of rifles being checked again and again, as if we could will them not to fail when it mattered most. Some tried to sleep. No one really did. I sat with a friend under a soaked canvas, sharing a cigarette. He looked at me and said, "Can you imagine? In a few hours, we might be dead." I didn't answer. Just took a drag, exhaled, and stared into the darkness. The sea was there, unseen but waiting. And for the first time in my life I understood something terrible. There is no sound more frightening than the silence of an army about to move. We all knew one thing: when the order came, there'd be no turning back. No prayers. No luck. No destiny. Only the raw truth of a beach that, until then, was just a name on a map. Can you imagine what it feels like? to be on the edge of history, not knowing if you'll live to see how it ends. That night, thousands of us felt it at the same time. And the world, though it didn't know it yet, was about to wake up with us. Dawn came at last. June 6, 1944. The longest night before the bloodiest sunrise. The sea was covered in shadows. In the distance you could see shapes, hundreds, thousands of ships moving slowly, breathing together, as if the ocean itself knew it was about to witness something it would never forget. The water slapped against the hull with a hollow rhythmic sound, like a clock counting down the last seconds before chaos. Inside each landing craft, boys barely 18 or 20 waited in silence. Some closed their eyes, trying to remember the smell of home, the taste of morning coffee, the sound of a familiar voice. Others held a folded photograph, a rosary, a letter written the night before with trembling hands. Just in case, they said. In case they never came back. The air smelled of salt, of fear, of fuel and rust. A thin drizzle slid down the helmets, along their faces, mixing with cold sweat. Above us, a gray sky hung heavy and starless. And under that darkness, the low murmur of engines blended with ragged breaths, whispered prayers, and the quiet metallic tapping of rifles against steel floors. The silence was painful. No one spoke more than a word or two. Officers moved among us, checking gear, repeating the same instructions in low voices. Every word landed like a sentence. 5 minutes. Check your weapons. Be ready. Time itself seemed to thicken, to hesitate. Every heartbeat felt slower, heavier. Each man breathed knowing it could be his last. I looked across at the man in front of me. His eyes were fixed, his lips tight, his hands shaking. He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. And in that moment I understood. We were all the same, fragile, human, standing naked before fate. The roar of the sea grew louder. For a second I thought the sky was roaring too. And it was. The horizon began to flash with orange bursts, not from the sun but from fire. The battleships had begun to shoot. The first thunder split the night in two. The earth, far away, answered back. And the air filled with a noise so violent, it felt like your chest might tear apart. Engines roared together, and the boat started moving. The waves crashed, the metal groaned, the ramps rattled. Men looked at each other, knowing there was no turning back now. Fear turned into something else, a kind of clarity. In that instant no one thought of the future. There was only the now, the noise, the shaking, the life packed into one impossible second. When the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, it felt as if the whole world took a single breath. The mist began to rise, revealing a dark, burning coastline. And then, the order came. To the shore. The ramps dropped with a scream of metal. The air exploded with gunfire, with shouts, with the thunder of shells. The water turned to glass, a mirror reflecting hell itself. Men stumbled, fell. The sea ran red. The smell of salt, gunpowder, and blood became one. Thousands of hearts beat together, pounding so loud it felt like the earth itself was alive. Every step forward was a victory. Every breath, a small battle won against panic. I moved ahead, not thinking, not looking back. The noise was so great I stopped hearing it. All that remained was vibration in my bones, the weight of the rifle, the sand grinding inside my boots, and the brutal certainty that this sunrise was changing the world forever. It was the beginning of D-Day, a day that never fades, because there, in that cold water and those burning beaches, the world itself was being rewritten. And though many never rose from that sea, their courage still floats in the air of that dawn, an echo that, even now, can still be heard in the waves. And then, the moment came. The metallic slam of the ramp hit like thunder. For a second, everything froze, breath, thought, fear. And then hell opened wide. There was no glory ahead. No speeches, no waving flags. Only cold water, smoke, and an invisible wall of bullets slicing the air like blades. The roar of the sea blended with the roar of the cannons. The sky, heavy, gray, seemed to bend over us, crushing every bit of hope. The first men out barely took 2 steps before disappearing. Some sank under the weight of their gear, swallowing seawater mixed with blood. Others fell before they even reached the shore. The sea, that old witness, turned red. And still the ones behind couldn't stop, because stopping meant dying too. The water rose to our waists, then to our chests. The cold was so brutal it felt like it tore the soul right out of you. Each wave carried bodies, empty helmets, shattered wood, weapons without owners. The smell of salt and gunpowder mixed with iron and death, forming a thick, choking fog that blurred the world into noise and shadow. Orders vanished in the wind. Cries blended with explosions. Nothing made sense anymore. There was only one direction left, forward. One step, then another, and another still. Every meter gained on that beach cost the life of a friend. I saw a boy fall beside me, no scream, no sound. His eyes fixed on the horizon as the tide pulled him away. There was no time to stop, no time to mourn, only the madness of moving forward. The ground shook beneath the blasts. Sand flew with fragments of metal, screams and smoke. Machine guns never stopped. Each burst split the air like a storm of thunder. At times, the noise was so deafening you could no longer hear anything. Only a piercing ring, as if the world itself had gone deaf from fear. We threw ourselves to the ground, crawling through burning craters, searching for anything, a rock, a fence post, a shadow, anything that might give us one more second of life. Mud clung to our faces, rifles jammed with sand, hearts pounded so hard it hurt. And when you lifted your head, all you saw were more men running into the same fire. Waves of young soldiers, brave and terrified, charging forward because courage was the only choice left. No one was ready for this. No one can ever be ready to see their best friend fall just a few feet away. To hear his name shouted in the chaos and not be able to move to help. Something inside you breaks with every face that disappears. And yet we kept going. Because in that storm the only thing left written in our blood was this: advance. 1 inch, 1 breath, 1 heartbeat at a time. And then, through the smoke and the fire, we finally began to see it, the beach. That strip of land we'd been dreaming of, now just a few steps away, but still a world apart. Each step onto that sand was a victory stolen from death. Some crawled, bleeding and broken. Others screamed names the wind carried away. But every single one of them kept their eyes forward. I remember lifting my head and seeing the sun break through the clouds for the first time. The light touched the blood-stained sand, and for one fleeting instant, it felt as if the world had paused, just to watch us. And that's when I understood. We weren't just fighting to survive. We were fighting to give meaning to every life fading around us. Some whispered through cracked lips, barely audible, "If I make it out of this beach alive, it'll be a miracle." And they were right. Because that day in Normandy, every breath was a miracle. Every step an act of faith. Every heartbeat, a promise kept for those who couldn't go on. That was D-Day, raw, real, alive. An ocean of courage mixed with fear, tears, and blood. And under that smoke-covered sky, something was born that no bullet could ever destroy. The truth that even in the heart of hell, the human spirit can still move forward. They say hope is the last thing to die. And that morning, on that beach covered in smoke, fire, and fear, some men held on to it as if it were the only thing left in the world. At first it seemed impossible. Every attempt to move forward was met with a storm of bullets that ripped the air to shreds. Bodies fell. The ground shook. The sky roared. Everything screamed that there was no way out. And yet, through the thunder and despair, the human spirit, that stubborn miracle, refused to surrender. Group after group crawled forward, inch by inch, through craters and barbed wire, searching for anything that could keep them alive. A rock barely larger than a man. A twisted piece of steel half buried in the sand. The body of a fallen friend that became a shield. There, gasping, trembling, deafened by the noise, they reloaded, they breathed, and they pushed on. One more step. And another. And another still. Orders barely carried over the explosions. Officers shouted, but their voices drowned in the thunder of artillery. So the men without rank, the ones with no stars on their sleeves, began to lead. "Follow me. We can't stay here," they cried, their voices coming not from the throat but from the soul. And others followed, not out of duty but instinct, because deep down they knew, the only way to live, was to move. Even in the chaos, flashes of humanity appeared like sparks in the dark. A soldier raised an improvised flag, just a torn piece of cloth, to mark a safe path through the smoke. Another dragged a wounded friend across the sand while bullets hissed so close they sliced the air. A third knelt beside a dying man and without a word, held his hand until the last breath. Small gestures, almost invisible amid the roar of war. Yet each one changed the course of a minute. And on that beach, a minute could last forever. Every few yards cost a soul. Every foot of ground was paid for in blood. But those few feet meant everything. The difference between defeat and hope. Between endless hell and the chance of a new dawn. I remember looking around, covered in mud and ash, not understanding how I was still alive. The air was so hot it burned to breathe. And still the men kept going. Later some said they felt something. A force pushing them forward. As if unseen hands lifted them each time they fell. Maybe it was luck. Maybe courage. Or maybe it was the faith of those who were already gone. And slowly through the smoke and screams, something began to change. The enemy fire sounded farther away. Our voices grew louder, closer, stronger. For the first time the horizon stopped looking like death. And began to look like hope. Someone shouted, "We're moving up." And that single phrase became a roar. Wounded or not, exhausted or terrified, they advanced, crawling, limping, shouting, falling, rising again. The ground shook beneath the blast. But under the noise there was something new. A heartbeat of victory, faint but growing. And there, in the greatest pain a human being can know, the first sparks of triumph were born. Not the kind written in history books or polished by medals, but a victory made of blood, mud, and tears. A victory of men who refused to stop, who kept crawling forward even as the world collapsed around them. And on that broken beach, hope, the one everyone thought was dead, stood up again, not waving a flag, but beating quietly in the sound of a single heart, still alive against all odds. When it seemed like everything was lost, something changed. It wasn't an order. It wasn't a miracle. It was a breath, a single trembling breath, shared by men drenched in seawater and fear. Men whose eyes still carried the reflection of death, but who suddenly realized they were still alive. And on that beach, that simple fact, being alive, was already a victory. Smoke covered everything. The sky was a single black cloud, and the sand had turned to mud, blood, and steel. And yet they moved. Without knowing how, without knowing why, they started to crawl forward. Some without helmets, others without weapons, all with their eyes fixed on the enemy. Because when you have nothing left to lose, even fear gives up. Grenades flew through the air like burning meteors, tearing apart the machine gun nests that had seemed unbreakable minutes before. Each blast shook the ground. Flamethrowers roared, carving paths of fire through German bunkers. Every explosion was more than just victory, it was a human roar, a declaration that they still existed. The echo of those detonations wasn't only gunpowder, it was hope. It was thousands of souls shouting without words that death alone wasn't enough to stop them. The engineers, those silent heroes, moved forward under a storm of bullets. They carried no heavy rifles, no armor, only tools, courage, and the blind faith of men who knew that thousands depended on them. They cleared mines with trembling hands, cut through barbed wire, tore down steel obstacles while sparks and fire rained over them. Every time one fell, another stepped up. The path had to be opened, or everything would be lost. And slowly the sound of despair began to change. Between the screams of pain came new voices. Commands, shouts of movement, shouts of victory. Forward. We've got them. Keep going. words that sliced through the noise like arrows of light. German positions began to fall, one after another. Where there had been fire, now there was movement. Where there had been fear, a wild, burning will to live began to rise. Every meter gained was a story of sacrifice, a reminder that courage isn't measured in medals, but in footsteps. And then, it happened. Through the smoke and the wreckage, an officer stood up on the rubble. His face covered in dust, his voice cracked but fierce, and shouted, "The way is open, keep moving." That cry tore through the chaos like lightning. And the men, those same men who moments before could barely move, started running. Running without looking back, without thinking, without even feeling the pain. It was as if something unseen had lifted them, as if the earth itself was pushing them forward. Every stride defied fate. Every breath was a rebellion against death. The beaches that at dawn had looked like open graves had become, by midday, the doorway to freedom. The air still smelled of smoke and blood, but within that inferno, something else began to stir. Life. A new life born out of chaos. That was the true miracle of D-Day. That ordinary men, young, terrified, wounded, and exhausted, did the impossible together. That fear didn't win. That hope, even buried in mud, still found a way to breathe. Every step, every inch of ground taken, was the echo of thousands of voices that refused to surrender. And when the final gunfire faded and only the whisper of the sea remained, history knew something irreversible had happened. The road to victory had been born, not just out of smoke and blood, but out of faith, courage, and the will of those who dared to take one more step. Behind every uniform, there was a life, a name, a story, a dream. They weren't just soldiers. They were sons, brothers, boyfriends, young men who left everything behind to jump into those beaches. Many carried letters in their pockets, letters they never got to send. Some were love notes. Others were just short messages to their families. "Mama, don't worry about me. I'll be home soon," they wrote, never knowing that maybe that letter would be the only thing left of them. There were men who, seeing their friends fall, ran straight into enemy fire just to pull them to safety. Some survived because of those brave hands. Others gave their lives trying. You know, the survivors always said they could never forget those faces, those final seconds beside a friend. Even 50 years later, they said they still heard those voices in their dreams. One veteran told a story. While running across the beach, he saw a young soldier holding a photograph. The picture of a woman, maybe his girlfriend. The boy fell before reaching the water. The veteran who lived said he never forgot that face, or that photo lying wet between sand and blood. There were also moments of impossible courage. A sergeant, already dying from his wounds, raised his hand and shouted to his men to keep moving, to not stop for him. That cry gave them the strength to take an enemy position. He didn't live to see it, but because of him, dozens were saved. And even in the middle of all that pain, there were small flashes of humanity. Some captured German soldiers were treated by the same medics, whose seconds earlier had been saving Allied lives. In the middle of hate, there was still a trace of compassion. Veterans who spoke years later all said the same thing. D-Day wasn't just the biggest battle in history. It was the greatest test of the human heart. Fear was everywhere, yes, but so was the will to live, the wish to go home, to hold their families again, to dream of a life beyond those beaches. Some made it. Others stayed forever in Normandy. And those who came back carried the weight of that day for the rest of their lives. That's why, when someone asks what D-Day was really like, the survivors don't talk about maps or victories. They talk about the friends who never came home, the letters that never arrived, the promises broken by the sound of gunfire. That is the true story of D-Day. Not just a battle, but millions of hearts beating between life and death. When the battle finally ended, what was left was a silence that hurt more than the gunfire. The sand was covered with helmets, backpacks, empty boots. Thousands of bodies lay scattered across the beach, as if the sea itself had demanded a terrible price for letting men cross it. That day, more than 4,000 Allied soldiers were killed in just the first few hours. But you know, numbers don't mean much. 4,000 is just a number. Behind it were 4,000 names, 4,000 families who received a letter that began with the coldest words ever written. We regret to inform you, every white cross in the cemeteries of Normandy marks a world that ended too soon. Men who never met their children, young boys who stopped dreaming of home, mothers who never got to hold their sons again. The people from the nearby villages said that after D-Day the beaches didn't look like beaches anymore. The sand that once was soft and calm was burned and broken. The wind carried bits of torn letters, twisted helmets, and pieces of lives that would never be finished. Imagine walking through that silence, hearing only the waves, and seeing thousands of bodies, covered with makeshift blankets. The survivors said that silence stayed with them forever. It wasn't the calm of victory, it was the calm of loss. Some soldiers who made it out alive never spoke of what they saw. They kept the pain buried deep, even from their own families. Others told the story again and again, as if by speaking it out loud, they could give a voice to the friends who never came home. And here's the hardest truth, my friend. D-Day wasn't only the price for Europe's freedom. It was the beginning of wounds that never fully healed. Every grave in Normandy reminds us how high the cost of a single day in history can be. Years later, when the veterans returned to those beaches, many knelt down and cried like children. They said they could still hear the voices of their brothers calling to them from the waves. They said those beaches would never again be just sand and sea. The human cost of D-Day can't be measured in numbers or written on history pages. It's measured in the tears still falling on those white crosses, in the silence of families who never got one last hug, and in the memory of everyone who understands this simple truth. Freedom was never free. June 6, 1944, it wasn't just another day. It was the day history changed direction. Until that moment, it seemed like the Nazi shadow would never end. Europe was on its knees. Millions lived under fear, hunger, and oppression. But that morning in Normandy opened a door of hope that would never close again. The D-Day landings allowed the Allies to set a firm foot on French soil. From those beaches began the march that would free Paris, cross Europe, and reach Berlin less than a year later. Historians say that without Normandy, the war would have lasted much longer, and the cost in lives would have been unbearable. D-Day wasn't just a military victory. It was a turning point, a moment when enslaved nations began to dream of freedom again. But what makes it truly great isn't found in maps or battle lines. It's found in people. The young men who weren't generals or politicians, who changed the course of the world through courage alone. Every step they took on that beach was a blow against tyranny. Every life lost became a seed of freedom for millions who would never even know their names. The echo of D-Day spread across the entire world. In occupied villages in France, people lit candles in secret, whispering prayers of gratitude that the end was near. In concentration camps, where hope had nearly died, rumors spread that the Allies were coming. And far away, in homes across America, Canada, and England, families felt that this sacrifice was opening the future. D-Day was a sign. Evil would not last forever. It proved that when millions of hearts beat for the same cause, even the darkest night begins to fade. And though history books speak of strategy, armies, and numbers, the men who lived it said something simpler. They said, that day the world was saved by ordinary young men who did extraordinary things. So when we look back, my friend, we don't just see a battle. We see the moment when humanity's destiny changed. Not through cold orders, but through the courage of those who, without knowing it, became heroes forever. When I close my eyes and picture those beaches, I don't just see rusty helmets or rows of white crosses. I see faces. I hear voices. I feel the echo of thousands of hearts that took their last beat there. D-Day happened more than 70 years ago, and yet it's still alive. It lives in every family that remembers a grandfather or an uncle who never came home. It lives in books, in documentaries, and in those ceremonies where old veterans, with medals on their chests and tears in their eyes, embrace one another. knowing that day bound them together forever. People often say, time heals everything. But time doesn't erase sacrifice. Time doesn't turn those beaches back into just sand and sea. Time turns sacrifice into memory. And memory, my friend, is the only thing that keeps us from repeating the same mistakes. Every time a young person visits Normandy and sees that ocean of white crosses, they understand right then that the freedom we enjoy today wasn't born for free. It was paid for there, with blood, with fear, with courage. That's why remembering D-Day is not about looking back with nostalgia. It's about looking back with respect and with gratitude. It's a reminder that even in the darkest days, human beings can still find within themselves the strength to resist, to fight, and to change the course of history. And I think that's the real legacy. Not the numbers, not the strategies, but the lesson that hope can rise from pain. That even when everything seems lost, someone, somewhere, will still take that step forward, even trembling, even afraid, not knowing if they'll make it back. Today, as the world faces new uncertainties, as division and hate try to grow again, the memory of D-Day reminds us that we can still come together for something greater than ourselves. So if anyone ever asks you why we must remember D-Day, tell them this: because there, on those distant beaches, ordinary men proved that courage can change the world. And that lesson, my friend, must never be forgotten. The years passed. The sand became just sand again. The sea returned to its calm shine, and the beaches of Normandy filled with tourists, walking slowly, unaware of what once happened there. But for those of us who survived, those beaches were never just a place again. Every grain of sand holds a memory. Every wave that breaks on the shore carries back an echo. Decades later, many of us returned. We came back with white hair, tired bodies, leaning on canes, but with the same emotion we felt on that distant morning. And as our feet touched the sand, some of us fell to our knees, unable to hold back the tears. Others stood in silence, staring at the horizon, as if waiting to see their comrades rise from the sea. An old soldier once said, "I never really left this beach. My body went home, but my heart stayed here, with those who didn't make it." That sentence, my friend, says everything we feel. The voices of the fallen still echo in the cemeteries, where endless rows of white crosses seem to speak when the wind passes through them. They echo in the letters never sent, in the photos kept in dusty boxes, in the memories found years later by sons and granddaughters. Today, when I walk along those peaceful shores, I see children playing, couples holding hands, and I think how beautiful that is, because the freedom they enjoy was bought right there, with blood, with fear, with sacrifice. Some people say history belongs to the past. I don't believe that. I believe history lives inside us, every single day, and as long as someone remembers what happened on June 6, 1944, those voices will never fade. That's why, my friend, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The shouts, the orders, the prayers, the silences. And though the world has changed, though decades have gone by, those voices are still here. In my memory, in my skin, in every corner of Normandy. Because there are wounds time can't erase, and sacrifices that must never be forgotten. I've lived long enough to understand something. The real battle of D-Day didn't end in Normandy. It's still alive today, in what we do with the freedom so many left behind on those beaches. Because what good is sacrifice if we forget it? What good are thousands of white crosses if we see them as just a postcard? The legacy of D-Day isn't found in history books, or museums, or even in presidents' speeches. The real legacy lives within us, in every moment we choose peace over hate, life over destruction, gratitude over indifference. I was there, and let me tell you something. Those men who fell that day didn't die dreaming of medals, or statues, or parades. They died dreaming of home, dreaming of holding their mothers, kissing their sweethearts, laughing again around a table. That was their dream, and their gift to us was the chance to live it. Today, when I see my grandchildren running free through a park, I know that's the fruit of that day. Every child's laughter, every song, every sunrise in peace was bought in Normandy. And that's why, my friend, remembering D-Day is not just an act of memory, it's a moral duty. It's a promise to those who stayed behind, that their sacrifice was not in vain. As long as someone tells their story, as long as someone remembers their names, the echo of that day will remain alive. And so it should, because the freedom we breathe today is the voice of those who gave their final breath. On the sands of Normandy, the sea still touches that shore. The waves come and go, just as those boys once came and never returned. The wind still brushes the white crosses, and if you listen closely, it seems to whisper their names. Time has erased the footprints in the sand, but not in our memory, because there are things that neither the wind nor the sea nor the years can ever take away. D-Day didn't end in 1944. D-Day lives on in every breath of freedom we take today. And as long as the world keeps turning, those beaches will keep reminding us of one simple, eternal truth, that the courage of a few can change the destiny of all. This was the story of D-Day, the dawn when the world held its breath. There, on those beaches of Normandy, thousands of young men carried the weight of the future on their shoulders. Many never came back. Others returned forever changed. But all of them left footprints in the sand that neither the sea nor time will ever erase. I saw it. I felt it on my skin. I saw boys barely 18, running toward death, their hearts trembling, their eyes fixed on the horizon. I saw letters floating in the waves, helmets rolling in the foam, prayers drowned beneath the roar of the guns. And even though the years have passed, that sunrise still burns in my memory, like a shining wound that never fully heals. That's why I tell you this story, because as long as someone listens, they're still here. Those who fell on Omaha, on Utah, on Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each name, each face, each cry deserves to be remembered, not as a number in a book, but as a human heartbeat that still echoes through those beaches. And I promise you, my friend, this won't be the last story. There will be more tales to tell, more memories of battles and sacrifices, of moments of humanity in the middle of hell. Because the past isn't a dead echo, it's a living voice. It warns us, it reminds us, it asks us never to forget. My friend, as long as my voice still carries, I'll keep telling you these stories, so that memory never fades, so that those beaches keep speaking to us through the whisper of the sea, and so that we never, ever stop honoring those who gave their lives on that eternal morning.